Hello and welcome, everybody. We're back. Spot Burn Podcast, episode 5. And you got your two hosts here today, Dan and
Bam Bam.
both back at it in the dungeon. We got everybody back together. We have a good one in store today. We've been excited about this one for a long time. Clearly, there is another guest in the studio with us. We're very pumped to have him. He's going to be our guinea pig and hopefully make it through the Spot Burn Gauntlet. But please give a warm welcome to our friend, fisherman, angler of all sorts, Jacob, a.k.a. Red Bear Fields.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Stoked to be here.
We're going to get into a whole background on Jake in a bit. So before we do that, we got our normal plugs. We're going to cover a couple little current event things. But Jake's here. He's, for those that don't know, he is the lead teacher at Wildlands School. He's also a board member at First Wisconsin Muskies, Inc. He's a Musky fool through and through. And we're going to get into some cool stuff that Jake and his students in the DNR have been doing for the last couple years, right?
Yeah,
almost
1
2
year.
years.
1 full year.
One
here.
full year. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be sweet. But first, let's thank our sponsors. We got Stealthcraft Boats, makers of some of the finest, most complete lineup of river boats. If you're looking for a new boat, they will hook you up, whether it's a big jet, power drifter, drift boat. Jake's got a drift boat. I got a raft. Bam Bam's got a stealth weld. We love our Stealthcraft boats. Go support those Midwest folks. They make some good stuff. And secondly, Cortland Line Company. They make some awesome, innovative fishing line for conventional and fly fishing. We love their fly lines. We just were using a few of them last night on the water. If you need some new bass bug lines, some new musky lines, this is the place to go. They got everything covered, and the season is coming, so get to spooling. You need to get your line, get a new line in the arsenal. I'm getting all nervous for Jake and stuttering a little bit. It's a good sign.
Yes, sir.
It feels like we're on the clock because we got a special guest, but we'll just power through it. I'll just keep drinking bubblers until I get too jittery. Last up, before we go on the main event, current events. It is time to get a new fishing license in Wisconsin. Out of state resident. I think we reminded y'all last time, so this is just another friendly reminder. Got a license up. Need trout stamps if you're doing that whole thing. Great Lakes. There's a bunch of different stuff. No matter where you are fishing, you need a license. Also, Fly Fishing Film Tour is a week away as of recording this podcast. April 20th here in Madison at the Barrymore. You are going to want to be there. There's going to be a ton of good prizes. And then a couple days after that, we got the big Trout Unlimited Spring Fair. If you didn't get any prizes at the film tour, come on over to the Spring Fair. There's going to be a ton going on. All of that supports our cold water trout fisheries here in southern Wisconsin. And that's really it. That's all we got. We got a meaty topic, so I'm not going to mince words on any of that. I guess let's introduce Jake. Jacob, tell us a little bit about how the hell you got on this, where you're from, the whole story. We want to take it back to the beginning.
Yeah, totally. I'm from western Wisconsin, about an hour east of the Wisconsin-Minneapolis border, a little town called Eau Claire. Lived most of my life there. After college, lived out west and lived out of a pickup truck and worked wilderness therapy for at-risk youth in the summer times, in between teaching during the school years down in Texas. Taught for a year here in Madison, and then ultimately relocated in 2011 back to Eau Claire to take the job that I have right now, which is a teaching position at Wildlands School.
That's awesome. That's actually interesting. We all have lived in Madison at one point in our lives.
Yep.
Some of us are from here. Some of us came here. A little bit different driving through town than you probably remember it.
It's different, for
Yeah.
sure. And there's like hallmarks and staples that brought back some nostalgia, and like, oh, you travel to a different town and oftentimes there's no like visual landmarks, and then you come back to a place you've been and there they are.
The same but different. Yeah. How did what do you do right now professionally?
Yeah.
Kind of tease us a little bit as to why you're here, but what do you do professionally, and like how did you get into that?
Yeah.
It's not just a traditional teaching path. It's kind of something really sweet.
Yeah, so my role right now is lead teacher out at Wildlands. Wildlands is a small charter school, project-based charter school that's located on a 450-acre wilderness reserve just outside of Eau Claire. So We have a really strong focus and a history that we'll talk more about with experiential field science projects, both like upland field projects and a lot of aquatic limnology, tracking, field ecology and water ecology projects. We've got about 75 students year to year, so quite a small school. And we
Pre-high school or into high school?
seventh grade through 12th grade.
Okay.
So kids finish up with elementary school. They spend a year in middle school typically, and then they come out for the 7th grade.
How long have you been there, you said?
So I student taught at the school when I was going to college at UW Eau Claire. Graduated with a degree in elementary education and knew I wanted to teach, but also knew that I wanted to teach outside someplace. And was fortunate enough to be able to student teach at the school in 2009. And then, like I said, moved around the country and bopped all over the place. And when I came back to work full-time was 2011, the fall of 2011, and have been there since and have worked with all of the grade levels that we have as like a primary advisor role at some point since then. So started with 9th and 10th graders primarily, moved into working with the middle schoolers for a couple of years, and then since about 2017, I think, took over the lead teacher, head teacher position, and then so now my day is spent kind of 50-50, half my time doing like administrative stuff, keeping the school open. But then the more interesting and exciting part is the other half of my days are spent working with small and large groups of students doing pretty cool experiential projects.
Awesome. How did you two run into each other and end up meeting? That was probably right around 2011 or a little bit later.
It was a little bit later, and our orbits had been kind of overlapping for a few years, right? Because Eau Claire's not a super big city, and the fly community is like vibrant and like a really cool community, but it's not a huge community, right? So if you're doing the same things for long enough, you're eventually going to overlap. But
you'll see each other at Quick Trip at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Who's that guy with the rod rack?
Yep.
Who's that guy with the rod rack?
He's got a goofy boat in the Midwest. He's got to be cool.
Yeah, I think the first time we ever saw each other, we were both trouting, and we got back up to the parking lot, and both of us had like square-shaped vans. They were like, "You trout fish and have a square-shaped van? Me too."
Did we just become best friends? Yep. The rest is kind of history from there. Never look back.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Because when I met you guys, you were both on the same team for Treelands. We've talked about that a little bit before on that, but that's when we met. Yeah. Really, I'm pretty sure. And then, like you said, the rest is history. But we want to just cover some, high level stuff. I know we have a really juicy topic. I'm going to stop teasing it at some point, but I want to set the stage a little bit because I think it seems like all of the pieces of your background kind of made you really perfectly fit to run a project like this. So Talk to me a little bit how you got the fishing background. Like, where did it start, and then how did it meander itself into fly fishing for muskies? Yeah, totally.
I think like a lot of people, I as a kid fished all the time. I spent as much time as I possibly could outside. My parents always tell the story about having to like pry me out of the deer stand or pry me back from the edge of the dock. And I think if you asked me at that point, I wouldn't have even been able to say that I love fishing or I love hunting. I just didn't sit still well, and I liked to be outside. And I've always been really driven by a curiosity about other living things, fish, animals, wildlife, you name it. My whole childhood and like school, loved that kind of stuff. And like a lot of people, when high school hits, you start to get super busy and it sort of slows down. And then it sort of rekindled into a passion for the outdoors in college. And didn't have a ton of folks who shared that like interest and passion set when I was in college. So just did a bunch of fishing and hunting by myself, which was enriching and rad. But at some point, you're starting to look for community and not like looking for ways to not spend so much time in between your own two ears.
It's like what Bam Bam said about that kiteboarder the other day. It's like, yeah, that looks rad, but that's just a lot of alone time. Yep. You can't really do that one with buddies, and that's kind of the same with bow hunting.
Yeah. So in terms of the like evolution into fly fishing, I didn't start fly fishing until I started at Wildlands School, actually, and so that's a cool kind of intersection. But a dear friend and a person who I think of as a total mentor taught me how to fly fish in one of my first years at Wildlands, and took me to a little spot with some brown and brook trout, and I, like 3 casts into it on a nymph rig, my line just absolutely screamed off and my rod bent, and I was like, man, I thought this was going to be harder. This is really awesome. I'm really good at this. And I got all reeled in, and sure enough, it was actually just a sucker.
Oh yeah.
But like watching that bobber go down, that was it. And my mentor who taught me how to do it has joked with me for years that he just ruined me. That he's like, feel free to give me a list of people in your life that I should apologize to for showing you this whole fly fishing thing. And yeah, so then it really just, I think, like, bloomed into an opportunity. One of the unique things about Wildlands School is that the project-based learning platform works the very best we've found when the staff members, the teachers of the school, are bringing the things that they're passionate about to the school and facilitating projects in those areas, because the process of teaching and learning just doesn't really work if you don't love the stuff you're trying to teach.
Even at traditional schools, we probably all have memories. I do, of like classes that took to me, or really teachers that took to me, and it was because they were passionate about that topic, even if it was, not something cool like what we're about to talk about, whether it was like European history. It was still like, oh, I could feel the passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's contagious, right? And it doesn't have to be fishing and hunting and outdoor stuff. Like, we have really talented staff out at that school that have different interests than me, but that's great because we also have different students. And as long as they're really, really excited about it, the kids will catch that too. And that's what we found for many years, especially with the projects like what we'll talk about later.
Yeah. Where did the bug for Muskies start to really tick away?
Man, I think probably just getting introduced to something really unique about where we live is that there's all sorts of really, really cool game species to chase. Growing up in Eau Claire, I think a lot of people, myself definitely included, I'll speak just for myself, we have an embarrassment of freshwater resources in our area.
Rotten.
And it's easy to take those for granted, right? They become so commonplace, and the familiarity makes them disappear when you're growing up. And then coming back, finding fly fishing, and then having this epiphany that, oh, actually, there's these amazing resources everywhere, and they're full of really cool things to go catch. So trout fishing evolved into smallmouth fishing. The places where we were smallmouth fishing are also awesome places to catch lots of other fish, right? And I think there's an imagination process and a curiosity process that just takes it one step further. And I think most of us have had a situation where we caught a pike in a spot where we thought we would catch a smallmouth or something similar, and suddenly realizing on a fly rod, like, holy smokes, that was fun. That was a hoot. And realizing that the technology and the program will work for muskies and work really well sometimes. Similar to watching that first trout bobber go down, the first follow into a boat, figure 8, and then sort of like casual, careless swim off was game over, right? It became the thing I wanted to do, was to turn that.
And you're in, or you're like, no, I don't even want to do that.
Yeah.
How does it relate to, like, because you bow hunted seriously for a while, if I recall. We've talked about that a little bit already on a couple other episodes, just how they're similar pursuits, kind of. And do you see some of that, or do you think there's part of it that, like, there's a reason you're musky fishing and we're also bow hunting, like part of your personality a little bit?
Yeah, I think especially musky fly fishing, right? I think there's a lot of overlaps. Like I said, I spent a lot of time in the woods and on the water by myself in college, and I grew up in a family that had a really strong whitetail hunting tradition, and that the desire to be in the woods bow hunting more than just in the woods hunting more than just the 9-day gun season was like a natural evolution into the archery world. And then there's so much time in when you're pursuing whitetails with archery equipment aggressively, there's so much time to sit and reflect. And you get, I think that itch gets scratched for me in a really cool way, musky fly fishing. And then you have the added bonus of like all of the cool things that you experience when you're outside, especially outside for long periods of time, that if you're just sitting in a bow stand by yourself, like you don't have anybody to share that joy with. You don't have anybody to like store those memories with. And so the fact that like catching a muskie on a fly rod in so many ways, for me at least, is rewarding in some of the very same ways that having success like while bow hunting is. And then you add in the fact that like some of the most dear rad
the
people
team
in your
sport.
life.
Yeah.
The community, man, the teamwork. Yeah.
Someone else needs to row you. Someone else usually helps you net a fish.
Yeah. I mean,
But
I've
it's
said
also
it, we've
both
said
those
it.
moment. They both kind of have less so deer hunting, but it's kind of that eternity of boredom punctuated by moments of chaos.
Truly.
You know?
And, it's such a singular experience to have that monumental success, that feeling of monumental success when you have success while you're bow hunting, and that singularity of the experience where it would be like super hard to communicate to anybody else in your life how or why it was so rad. But when you're musky fly fishing with your buddies, you don't have to try and communicate how amazing it was. There's no need to find words for this experience that's really hard to articulate how valuable and rewarding it is.
Especially when it sucks.
Yeah, especially
Like
when
that-
it sucks.
We were all in a boat for a sucky experience, and it was just like still one of our favorite times fishing together. And it was like I think you quickly filter those folks out when you're, can you fish is a prerequisite. Can you, be a good time? But it's really, for me, I think similar to you guys probably, like when things go shitty in south and there's a hole in the raft or it's pouring rain and the fish aren't biting or a giant just came off in 30-degree weather. Do you want to be around those people for 8 hours? Your true self comes out and it's right on your sleeve a little bit.
Yeah, it really is. It like makes friendships, it makes relationships just like glue together in a way that's hard to totally communicate to other people, right? It's like what's the 60 minutes after the heartbreak gonna be like, and like are you gonna be the kind of guy or the kind of person, and are your buddies gonna be the kind of people that you want to be around 60 minutes after the worst thing that you could think of happening happens,
And then like the best thing, because it's like, how do you handle, being on the top of the mountain for a moment, and then is knowing that your buddy rowing the boat had something to do with it, and it could have been you sitting down and him or her casting. It's like it's very
there's like a
fluid.
random order and sequence to it.
Yep. And then I guess talk a little bit about how not to change topics away from muskies, but how you also, ever since I've known you, had just part of your passion has been not just for fishing, not just for your background in teaching, but also deeply in conservation. And like not just, I don't want to offend anybody, but not just the like kind of table stakes, easy, I show up for the Trout Unlimited event. Like you are a boots on the ground type of dude when it comes to that. What motivates that? Where did that really start to blossom?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be super different in terms of like the where it comes out of than it would be for a lot of people. But yeah, truly for me, it's just like I had a moment where I really did have a little bit of like an epiphany of like, I have spent my whole life in wild spaces, both personally and professionally. As like we talked about, as a kid, running around state forests and running around county forests and standing on docks in places that are like gorgeous areas, right? And then after college, becoming a wilderness guide for youth, like starting to professionally utilize these wild spaces, and then coming back to my home and falling in love with fly fishing. Like in a immense way, my life has been defined by finding joy in public spaces, or in wild spaces, oftentimes public wild spaces, right? And so, yeah, I just had an epiphany that, it was time to flip the paradigm for me a little bit in terms of no longer just taking from these spaces and doing something to give back to them. And then I think the way that has looked in my life has been influenced and informed by my time at Wildlands School. So Wildlands started in 2005 as a really pretty radical experiment in like what would happen if you really changed the definition of what school meant, if you really changed the relationship that students have to their school and that teachers have to their school. And the founder of the school, who's my boss and my mentor, really does, his whole life has had an attitude of like, don't just talk about it, be about it. And so if you're gonna take a position on something, especially as important as conservation, then don't be someone that is gonna be willing to just talk about the importance of it without showing up when it's time to actually get to work. And that attitude, that perception, I think is what drove Wildlands to start in the first place, and it's what drove it to be a successful school, is that willingness to take the personal or the social or the professional risks necessary to do big things, to step up and be willing to venture your stake, create your stake in it. And that's been my journey towards conservation, is not wanting to simply have conversations about the importance of protecting and preserving and sustaining the places that have given me so much joy, but to show up on the days when it's time to actually be about it.
Which I think is one of the coolest parts in my perspective of what you and that school is about, is much deeper than just, I can relate to it having, struggled in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in the traditional school setting. It would have been sweet. I would have loved it to be in those settings and to be outside and explore and learn and all sorts of stuff. But beneath the hood is like kind of teaching that same ethic you're talking about. Don't just talk about it, be about it. And when it comes to wild places and outdoors, to impressionable teenagers.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
At the ripe time, when you're going to kind of go down a path in life, like you guys get them at a good point.
Yeah, yeah, it's really true. It's
Yeah.
really true. Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So I guess let's get into the main topic a little bit. I'm getting tickled over here because I know what it's going to be about. So for those, just to avoidance of doubt, as we've talked about here for a little bit, Jake is a lead teacher at Wildlands School, and we're going to let him give a little bit of a overview of the project. But I think there's a Musky project that they're working on that we've been talking about and kind of curious in here at Musky Fool ever since you guys started working on it. I think it's something when we look out across the Musky Range, Musky country, all the way from North Carolina to Washington State, there are very few really cool projects that are helping us answer questions and learn about these fish. And then not to mention you're doing it with the kids in your classroom setting.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna get into all that, but I guess, take it away. Kind of give us the headlines of how did it start, what is it, and how did it kind of get the ball rolling?
Sure. Like to start at like the very beginning, the school itself started as a expansion of the founder of the school for years was running a summer school program for students that was an experiential field science program. And there was an opportunity to explore whether turning that summer program into a full year school and using the same concepts and ideas would work. And so that's what happened in 2005. And so that history, that legacy of field ecology projects and getting students out of four-wall classrooms and into muck boots and into hip boots and actually touching and feeling the science, it kind of has to be the starting place for the history of this particular project, because that history and that legacy informed two different experiences that we relied heavily on for this particular project. In 1999, our school, before it was Wildlands as we know it, when it was still just a summer experiential science project or program, did a radio telemetry tracking project of northern pike in a lake environment, so a relatively contained habitat area. Those fish got external radio telemetry tags put onto them, and then students, along with the project facilitators, spent a year tracking those northern pike. After I started at the school then, so if you fast forward to 2016, so right as I was kind of cutting my teeth, we did another radio telemetry tracking project for fish, this time with walleyes in a lake environment as well. So those were, again, radio telemetry tags. They were external tags that would essentially get clipped into the fish. And so there's been a long legacy or history of studying wildlife through radio telemetry tracking at our school. We've also done radio tracking of mammals as well. So we've done fishers, we've done black bear, so learning about the natural world and wildlife through radio telemetry tracking is something that's sort of baked into the history of our school. If you fast forward from the end of that walleye study several years, at the beginning of last school year, I was working with a group of students who may not have been able to identify it themselves, or maybe wouldn't necessarily say it out loud, but they absolutely loved science. They loved science, and they especially loved biology. They just didn't necessarily have the realization, because what they had defined or like perceived as the things that they love, they hadn't equated to actually being real science, right? And being real biology and that basis of inquiry. So because of that, I started a small group project with a group of those students that we just called Wildlife Biology for Hunters and Anglers. The goal of the project was essentially to make a list of the fish and land animals that these kids were the most passionate about pursuing for hunting or for fishing, and then working down that list to study the raw science, to put real research, biology, ecology research in front of those kids, in order to, in theory and hopefully, make them more successful in their pursuits of hunting and fishing, but also to expose them to the fact that their love for wildlife and their love for animals, and the fact that they love going fishing with their parents, or they love spending time on their family's farm hunting deer, connects directly to the raw science on that animal, right? And it was also a great opportunity to not just make them more successful in their pursuits, but do so in a way that was informed by current research, right? And expose them to research studies and the ability to read an abstract, things like that. So we picked our way down the list. We studied walleyes for quite a while. We took a long look at white-tailed deer. Muskies were kind of third on the list. And it was getting to be January or so of last school year. And I truly just stumbled back across the Northern Pike study from 1999. We were cleaning out some bins, doing some organizing, and I found the binder with all of the radio telemetry data. So we still use pen and paper when we're tracking them, but back then it was the primary way. So I accidentally refound this Northern Pike tracking binder, opened it up, and it was just page after page after page of students taking really, really high quality data. And that was truly like the spark for this project. It was like, my God, we've got the intersection of like 5 different things, all of which are great. We could do another tracking project. We could do it with Muskies. And it was just sort of a pipe dream at that point. But there was enough sort of working in the right direction that it made sense to me then to reach out to the DNR in our area, and was able to get in contact with our county fisheries biologist at the DNR. And, in terms of adding to the Goldilocks nature of the timing of the study, it just so happened that the DNR was that spring heading out to a particular body of water and a fishery that's pretty close to where our school is, for their 5-year rotational population survey. So we had like an initial conversation. I kind of laid out the background of the story in the same way that I did just now. And when we kind of got excited about the potential, but it didn't really have any form yet. I talked to my students about it, and they were super, super stoked on the idea of Muskies. And I was obviously really excited about it. I'm not sure that that my reason for being so stoked on a potential tracking project or study of tracking Muskies was the same reason that they were excited. Like a lot of the kids in this study, which is kind of interesting, that are in the project with me are not passionate muskie anglers. They're people who have fished walleyes with their family their whole life, or they're really great pan fishermen. Some of them don't fish at all. But like I said, they just have that innate curiosity for wild things, for animals. And then what I have found, especially working on this study, is that it's really difficult to give people a unique first-person experience with a fish like muskies and have them not become enticed and like allured and really like intrigued, right? There's just so many things about this fish that get into your psyche and get into your soul, right? They're mysterious, they're big, they're apex predators, they're elusive, as we'll talk about.
And maybe like from a science perspective too, like there's not a lot that we know about them.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
what was do you think was part of is that kind of the curiosity that sparked this interest from a group that wasn't perceivably musky angler kids?
Yeah, I think that probably has something to do
yeah.
with it. Yeah, for sure. And then just, I think there's always something uniquely intriguing about the biggest, meanest fish in the system, and the kids know that the state of Wisconsin has such a rich muskie legacy or rich muskie history, but because, like you said, they're not as well known. There are more like mysteries about this fish than maybe other species. You can't go out and catch a 25 fish limit of them, in a single day. So our kids they didn't have that number of overlapping data points about them. But for whatever the rationale or the reason was, they became excited about it quick. And like we talked about earlier, I was already super excited. And
Don't twist my arm.
Yeah,
Fine,
I guess.
I have to go do this for work.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So the conversation got pushed into like, this is a real thing. This is a real thing. We could do a radio telemetry tracking study of muskies in our area, and some unique things about our school that help us do it, that were just super necessary, right? That project-based, open-ended model that we employ. It was important to me that we do it the right way, though, right? And I don't just mean go through the right channels, but also make sure that we were informed, that the kids were informed, that we were talking to relevant stakeholders, things like that. And so long before any tags were bought or anything was actually happening in the field, there was a lengthy lead up to the project. And the first was, we didn't know what we didn't know. So that really, truly, the first part of of this project and what helped launch it into something that was real was just breaking down and analyzing what sort of studies had been done already. And that's where like throughout this project, I've been able to stand on the shoulders of some real giants.
Yeah, which we're going to talk about a couple of those.
Yeah.
When this started, was there like a goal that you guys had? Or was it like we have a hypothesis?
Yeah.
Or was it, no, this just actually organically makes sense, or a little bit of both, perhaps?
Yeah, it's, I think it's a little bit of both, but certainly when we talk about project-based learning out at our school, we're actually teaching our students a process for how projects work. And the first step of that project is identifying an essential question or a driving focus. And that's not always the same driving focus or essential question that you have at the end of the project, but it's something that you establish right away off the bat to help inform how you make your next decisions. And so right away, I don't think we had formulated exactly what that essential question was going to be, except that we knew that there hadn't been a radio telemetry tracking study on muskies done in this area that before. So we knew that if we reviewed a bunch of the relevant research, that we could basically ask a lot of the same questions that other people had asked before, and we could ask them in ways that applied to the specific study area that we were looking at, and that helped formulate the driving question, or the essential focus, which essentially ended up being like, what can we learn about musky movement patterns and habitat preferences by tracking them in our system.
I think one question that comes up, just kind of being a noob here, and maybe good for you to talk about now before we get too deep into it, is like, what is radio telemetry?
Yeah.
You know, we use pit tags here in Madison on some of our fish. You know, that's different. That's not the same. You know, I think especially for folks that, you know, do we know exactly where they are all the time? Like, explain a little bit of what radio telemetry is, how it's different than pit tags.
Yeah.
From the tech perspective, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. The tracking and the tags that scientists are deploying for tracking game, whether it be fish or you know, land animals, they tend to fall into two categories of either a passive tag or an active tag. So when we talk about pit tags, we're talking about a passive tag. That the only way that you're going to identify that tag is by going out and catching a fish that has a pit tag in it and then applying that reader. Active tags are, you know, a little bit of a different category. There's also acoustic tags and things where anytime a fish crosses a installed receiver, it's going to get a signal, and that signal is going to be recorded. So radio telemetry tags are a tag that emit a radio frequency often. Typically the interval is like every 2 seconds or so. This tag is going to emit a radio frequency, a radio signal at a specific frequency. So then with the use of an antenna and a receiver, that receiver can lock into the specific frequency that the tag is emitting, and when it does so, it gives you audio feedback. That audio feedback you can then use to narrow in and get closer to and you know, hopefully identify as close as possible where that fish is actually located. So
how close do you have to be? Like, I know with pit tag, I mean, like you said, you need to have the fish right here, and I need to have a reader, and sometimes that doesn't even work perfectly. So what's the like distance?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different variables that affect the range, and that's certainly something that we found in a very acute way, is that changing variables definitely impact the range that you're going to get your signal from. One big variable that affects it, especially in a lake or river environment, is like overhead obstruction, or essentially like line of sight to the tag itself. But anything that could disrupt, refract, or alter those radio waves from hitting your antenna in the right way can definitely impact the range. We also found in our study that that ice up definitely impacted our range. When the tags were brand new and the battery life was at its very strongest, on land, we were picking our signal up from 250 to 300 yards away pretty easily.
Wow.
And when we submerged them, we had a test tag. And when we submerged that test tag to like establish baselines, the range was still very, like quite far, 200 or so yards away. When those tags were actually deployed into fish and we were actively tagging those or tracking those fish on the water, around 75 to 100 yards typically would be when we would start picking up the signal or the ping, which is what we called the audio feedback on the receiver. But like I said, there's just a ton of different variables, especially if you're in a lake environment versus a river environment. You know, if you're in that river environment and you're floating down the river waiting for feedback, if the river meanders 2 or 3 different times in a 100-yard stretch, that's going to affect your feedback, right? But yeah, so typically when the tags were brand new and they were sending signal as strong as that battery was going to let them in the field while the study is active, 75 yards or so.
Which I think is important. Like that's news to me, and it's important because it's not just like you know where they are at all times. It actually is. It's quite difficult still to find them and track them, and you got to boots on the ground. You know, how are you guys doing some of that? Were you literally walking up and down the riverbank, or?
Yeah. We had several different methods for finding fish, depending on what part of the study area we were in. So what was unique about our study area is that it was made up of three pretty distinct habitat types. We had a river portion of the study, a river that branches into, or like two branches of a river that form a confluence, and then and so those two branches are quite small, and they join to make a bigger and what you just more classically define as like 100%, like that's a Midwest river, and they then flow into a reservoir. And so at the confluence of the river and the lake, you get a really classically sort of braided, backwatery habitat. And then it transitions into just a traditional or classic Midwest reservoir lake. So when we were tracking fish on the lake, we would employ typically two boats and just do a grid search on the lake, right? So using GPS to make sure that we were covering, like going up a line, down a line, up a line, down a line, and just moving over on our GPS to make sure that we were painting the lake. When we were tracking fish on the river, the way that we tracked them depended on seasonal and like water level influences for obvious reasons. In the spring when the water was high, it was pretty easy to float sections of the river. So using rafts, using drift boats, putting in at one spot, floating down with the receiver on, and scanning both shorelines and making sure that we were covering that area. Spring presented a little bit of a challenge too, because we had 10 tags in the field, and we can get to this. I don't want to like
spill the beans.
Yeah. So we were able to secure 10 tags. The DNR was able to get those 10 tags into Muskies, which that itself is something to not take for granted. Muskies are difficult fish often to do tracking projects and other studies on, because they can be really tricky to get collected, whether it be through fyke netting, through electrofishing, things like that. They don't respond nearly as well as other species to being electrofished for a bunch of reasons. They have a big body mass. It's possible also that they just, like, when they detect the electrofishing boom, they just shoot right through the boom, and you don't end up getting them. So
and then there's the net aversion,
right?
We've talked, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when we started the study, our goal was to use electrofishing and fyke netting to get 10 fish to put tags into, and we didn't end up needing to use fyke netting because the DNR and their techs were able to electrofish 10 muskies for us. So the 10 tags in the system, that means that our receivers, that box that is locking on to the frequency of each tag that's in a fish, it sequences through all 10 tags. So when we say that we're going out tracking, it's important to know that we're not just like identifying one fish frequency and then spending a day looking for that fish, right? We're spending as much time as we can in a particular portion of the study area, and we're scanning through all 10 frequencies. And you can set your scan interval to different lengths of time depending on what the habitat type that you're in and what your demands are. But for the most part, what would happen is that we were scanning each frequency for 8 to 10 seconds, sometimes 6 seconds, just depended on the different variables, whether we were on the lake, whether we were in moving water, whether the water levels were high, things like that. But essentially around that 8-second mark. So every 8 seconds, the receiver would bop to the next frequency. So when you're on the river, if the water levels are high and they're moving quite quickly, if there's a fish that's tagged and it just happens to be the previous frequency that you were just on, and you didn't pick it up, you've got 8 times 10
Yep.
seconds before you're going to be back on that fish's frequency. And by that time, the river could potentially have pushed you down to the next bend and things like that. So
Just another challenge. It's not just like, oh, we just went out and there's fish number 2.
Absolutely.
It's a lot more hunting them out and the kind of analog measures.
yeah, and that's something where experience as a muskie angler definitely helped, right? Because certainly we were broadcast scanning the entire time, but when encountered with an area that sure looked fishy, sure looked like muskie habitat, it allowed me to like work with the group and say, maybe we drop anchor here, or maybe we hop out of the boat here, and we like really give this some special attention. In the event that the water levels were high and it was tricky to track fish, floating sections of the river, we would also deploy like what we called land-based vehicle tracking. The study area has pull-off points that are pretty easy to use, and our students are pretty good at bushwhacking too. So like when you were talking about schlepping up and down through the banks, yeah, there was definitely some of that. So we identified 16 different spots that we could run our scans from land on the river portion of the study area. So, and that proved to be really helpful, especially in the middle to late parts of the summer when the water levels got really low and the river got really bony, and you just couldn't run those sections to float them. And then the other way that we tracked fish, which is interesting, we can talk more about if you want to, is via airplane. So the DNR contracts out with a pilot who has a plane that has a antenna on each of the wings, and then it has a receiver that funnels in so that the left wing antenna is piped into his left ear, his left headphone, and the right antenna is piped into his right earphone. And so by doing so, he can cover the entire study area in a relatively efficient way, and he can triangulate by the differences in the pings between his left and right ear to try and establish where that fish is.
And how success? I mean, that seems like, again, from a complete noob here, it'd be like, oh, you probably found them all that way. You can fly over the whole body of water.
We were awfully optimistic that was going to be the case, and interestingly, what we found is that our detection rate, so the rate at which we were finding tagged fish when we went out tracking, it really did stay pretty consistent regardless of the method of tracking, with the exception of saying like there were times in the year where fish were more consolidated, where by doing a grid search on the lake, for example, we might find more fish on a single day because of them being consolidated for reasons, fall, spring, where fish are going to potentially be more stacked into a single area. But if you were to just sort of take an average of our detection rate across the study, like 30 to 40% detection rate. So
every time you went out.
Every time we tracked,
chance.
just about, yeah. And I don't want to make it seem like that didn't mean that there were days that we would go out and find 5 or 6 fish. And I don't want it to sound like there weren't several days where we went out and we got blanked. But when we just look at the average detection rate, like I said, whether it was vehicle-based land tracking, floating sections of the river study or the river study area, or doing a grid search, our average, regardless of style of tracking, tended to be 3 to 4 fish. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. What where did it, like, just in the general broad sense, did these fish all start in the same spot? Like, did they electrofish them in the same area, and then you kind of knew where the starting point was, or where they originated from, or was it just like day one you go out to track them, were you pretty much blind as a squirrel?
So all of the fish were electrofished and tagged between the end of March and early April. I think it was like March 25th through like April 4th or April 5th. And so springtime, right? Yep. And all of the fish were tagged, shocked and tagged within a fairly close vicinity to the confluence of the lake and the river. The idea being that they were moving up, right? Once they were tagged, we gave them a period where we weren't out there tracking them, because the process of getting the tags into the fish can be in itself quite a stressor, right? So they get electroshocked, and then they go through the process of tag implementation, which is a really, really fascinating process, and one that the DNR does with exceptional care. Even to the point where like the DNR techs and the DNR biologists have found fish that they have tagged, and there's like no evidence of the surgical scar from tag implementation. So they really are meticulous, and they take a tremendous focus to care. But it's a stressful event for the fish, right? So if we were out there the next day and we find all 10 fish, then is it a function of the fish being there because that's where they were going to be, or is it because they just had a pretty stressful event, right? So the data becomes hard to like isolate why they're there, and so you give them a period.
You counted to 10 before you went and, it's
Yeah.
like hide and seek. You
Exactly.
had to give them a little bit of time to hide.
Yeah.
It's a good metaphor.
Yeah. But so once that resting period was over, then we started sort of like highlighting areas of the study to focus on, and some of that was informed by like predictions of where we anticipated them being, but honestly, some of it was informed by just like seasonal logistical issues, right? So super high water in the spring, getting to the places that we knew we could get to, and getting to the places that we knew later in the season would be really difficult to get to. So like specifically that like braided backwatery stuff in our study area that we knew once the water levels were going to drop, would be really difficult for us to scan through in any way other than the airplane. We focused on that portion of the study area early, knowing that it would be hard for us to get to it later.
Interesting. You talked about it earlier when you mentioned the implementation of the tags and how the DNR was obviously essential in that and kind of part of being essential in the project. Talk just briefly about like who were the stakeholders? How did you, like, for someone who's like, oh wow, this is rad, I want to get this going on our fishery. How was it paid for? How did you get how did it all get stitched together in that way?
Yeah. So the first thing that our students had to do is they had to have a smart conversation with the relevant stakeholders, right? And the first and most important stakeholder is going to be the DNR, right? And so I worked with the students to formulate a formal research study proposal. So they put together an abstract, they put together background information, they put together our methodology and what we anticipated to find, what our hypothesis was. And that's an area where our fisheries biologist, Joseph Gerbishak, did a tremendous job supporting us and assisting us. And it's also sort of where the start of a tremendous amount of support from Jordan Weeks came through as well, where Jordan was able to zoom in with our students and like not just ask questions that they needed to have answers to, but then also I think Jordan did a great job of understanding from the very beginning that it would be important for these students to have the experience, but also important for them to learn like how to write a formal study proposal. So when the students came back and they had a draft of what they thought was a really great study proposal, first I could take a look at it and identify some areas that needed improvement. Joseph could look at it and identify areas that needed improvement. And then Jordan could say like, hey, these variables, like you're making assumptions in this statement that don't totally check out. Why do you think this? Where did you get this? Like if you're saying this, but it doesn't necessarily check out with the rest of the research, change it so that you're not making predictive or assumptive claims, things like that, right? Mm-hmm. So they got that study proposal really dialed in to a point where they were proud of it. I was proud of it. It felt like a really like strong outline for what this study could look like. And, when I was talking earlier about like the phases in the project before the project had its own legs to stand on, this is the moment where it had its own legs, where like the fisheries biologists and technicians in our area checked it out and were like, this has legs. And Jordan gave us his support, and it finally had its own breath in like a real physical, tangible way. And then we knew these tags aren't free. The gas that we're going to have to use to track these fish aren't free, right? There's all these different steps. And that's where our school's project-based learning process really, I think, was allowed to shine, because it gave us the flexibility and the freedom to go find those relevant stakeholders, introduce the concept of the project, explain to them why it would be meaningful to their organization, and then make that ask for support. And what was important to me from the beginning is that it wasn't my face and my voice doing that, having those conversations and making that ask, but rather it was the students, right? So we contacted the Lake Association that is on the lake where the study occurred. We had contacted the First Wisconsin chapter of Muskies, Inc. We talked to the Sportsman's Club in our area, and each of those different organizations, our students presented the idea of the project. They outlined what the goals were. They explained how those goals were relevant to the organizations, and they made the ask, right? And like I said, I was able to stand on the shoulders of some absolute giants, not just the people who helped the study, and that's immense and shouldn't get understated in any way, right? But also the organizations, right? Like, no great thing is done alone. And I think it's really important to say into this microphone that, like, I'm here talking about this project, but this isn't mine. So we secured funding from First Wisconsin Muskies, Inc., who stepped up in a huge way. The Lake Association stepped up in a huge way. The Sportsman's Club did the same. And it's a cool moment to give credit and acknowledgement to my students too, right? Like, it's easy to put your muck boots on a warm day in May and go around and track fish in the river and in the lake, because that's really cool and it's fun, and it requires a different kind of like intelligence and competency, and it requires a different type of like risk to go stand in front of grown people that you don't know, that are all sitting in a table deciding something that matters to you based on the words that come out of your mouth, and to a T, those kids shined.
Yeah.
They just did great.
And that's what's so cool about it, is it's not just teaching them science anymore. It's
right.
public speaking, it's writing, it's, just the idea of getting different stakeholders with different incentives bought in, like all of these things that you face in the real world. If you want to accomplish something,
it's life,
they
right?
had, and you kind of just stood there and were like, I'll help, but it's your rodeo, which is sweet.
Yeah, truly. I just stood there and waited for any like panicked looks if they got hit with a question they weren't expecting, and that just didn't happen.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's what I love about the Wildlands School model in general, is like there's all these auxiliary skill sets just baked in, just by, naturally baked into everything you got going on there.
Yeah, it's life is multidisciplinary, right? Like, no skill or thing that we want to do in our life that has any meaning exists in a silo, and learning is the exact same way.
Yeah, that's sweet. You also mentioned Jordan Weeks, and for those that don't know, hopefully we'll get Jordan on one day. He's very well established in the Musky community, especially here in Wisconsin, fisheries biologist. But he also was probably, I don't want to speak out of turn, but probably the only other person to actually have the experience doing this. He did this on a body of water in northern Wisconsin, a radio telemetry study.
Yeah, certainly not the only one.
Okay,
but
correction.
But his work, number one, happened in Wisconsin.
Yeah,
and
one of the most recent ones too.
And it was really informative. Yeah, it was his study on the program area that he did his work on when he was finishing up. Believe it. I don't want to speak out of turn or speak for Jordan, but I believe at UW Stevens Point. His study was really informative, and it was something that we were able to use as a blueprint, especially because Jordan was so great about helping us and supporting us, right? So
So back to the Goldilocks thing too, of just like you had someone like you to help usher this in. You had the students, and you also had a perfect person to like kind of mentor and be like, hey, look out for this.
yeah, and there he worked in a study area that had both moving water and lake environments, so riverine and lake environments, like our study was going to as well. So it was just the coming across his work and reading and learning about his work, and then knowing that the amount of devotion and support that he's given to the state of Wisconsin and the musky fisheries here. It was like, fingers crossed, I'll reach out, and he just answered the call and supported us in a great way.
My few interactions with him when it comes to wanting to do good research, real scientific research on muskies, he is proud card-carrying member in support of that, which is awesome. Hopefully, we'll have to check with him, but we might even, like, when we launch this podcast, be able to just include what I don't know, so it's not for sure, but include that study so people can. I'm sure there's interest in checking it out. We'll check with Jordan. We'll let you know. It'll be in the podcast notes if we can do it. Okay, so very cool. Now, I guess, talk to me a little bit about, like, I feel like I have a good background of how this came to be, what you guys were doing, who was involved, what were some of the crazy learnings or challenges as well? Like, what started to happen?
Surprises even.
Well, and I
too,
guess,
yeah.
and I guess to start, I know you said this earlier, we'll just reiterate, like, it's still ongoing. There are no conclusive, the report has not been written yet. So we're kind of in the midst of this, which we want to be careful about saying we've learned something. We also want to be careful about that because, as Jake mentioned, it's 10 muskies on one water body in Wisconsin. That does not extrapolate to all muskies in that water body. They are all different. Does not extrapolate to all other water bodies. It's just a very specific kind of, you talked about that scope of understanding. It's like, we got to be careful to know what we're talking about here. This is not all muskies everywhere.
Right.
It's just a few.
Yeah, and that was something that Jordan did a great job of explaining to the students in a great way too, and he just like hit it out of the park when he was teaching our students. But one of the first things he said is, at the end of this study, you're going to know a lot about how 10 muskies behave. But that does not mean that you can extrapolate that into population level or even study area level, huge, concrete, set in stone or golden conclusions. So learn as much as you can about your 10 fish. And then at the end of the study, know that you're going to have data that points one way or it might lean another way, and learn as much as you can from that data while always understanding that it's 10 fish in a large system. Yeah. In terms of like surprises or things like that, or just things that we have learned, I think that everybody that helped us start this project from the DNR and the science community was all really good about front loading my students with the idea that this is field work, and field work is inexact at times. It gets wonky, and it is under no obligation. Like, the nature of science field work is under no obligation to agree with or confirm your expectations or predictions. So I think my students for sure, and probably me too, moving into the study, had this idea of like, man, we're going to go find them. We are going to find them, and maybe we won't find all of them all the time, but we're going to find most of them most of the time. And one of the biggest takeaways that I think I'll start with is just the similarities between trying to find muskies with a radio antenna and trying to find them with a fishing pole. Muskies are muskies, and they are elusive. And on days when you go out and you think you're just going to absolutely find every single fish because it just feels right, sometimes you get back to the landing and there's some long faces and you haven't heard a single ping through that receiver. You've just been listening to white noise for 8 hours.
Oh boy.
And then other days they'll, like, just like angling for them, they surprise you in weird ways. And maybe it's a hot day with low water levels and you're thinking, man, there's probably not a ton of dissolved oxygen in some of these areas. And you go out and you find 6 of them. you know? So I think it shouldn't have been such a big surprise probably, but one of the biggest takeaways for me now that, like you said, it's an active study, right? But we are now at this point coming on to the backside of the battery life of the tags. So yeah, one of the big takeaways is just the similarities and the fact that trying to find them with a fishing pole and trying to find them with a receiver, Muskies are Muskies.
Well, and it also underlines, I've kind of said it already, but it underlines like the difficulty of all this stuff, to do it right, to get the right data, to learn about muskies. You know, I think as anglers, we can be a little bit impatient. Like, why don't we know this? Why don't we know this? Of course they go there. That. Why don't we have data that says this? We know this about walleyes, and it's, well, they're muskies. They make it a little bit harder. Then you only have 10 of them. And you have to, well, and then I think, not to spoil it, but you lost one.
We did.
What's that? I mean, I've heard the story before, but I've never really heard it from the horse's mouth. I would share that, because I think there's a lot of like the challenges of muskies. This is a great example of what can happen and what does happen regularly in Wisconsin and all over.
Exactly, right. And like we knew going into the study, like natural mortality for living things exists, right? And there's all sorts of really uncontrollable variables that impact natural mortality. And so if you start out with 10 fish, there's no guarantees you're going to end with 10 fish, right? Because 1,000 different things can happen that, you know, depending on the size of the fish, it could get predated. It could just die of old age, right? So we knew that there was a chance going into the study that we don't end with the same number of tags as we began with. And in fact, it not even like a small possibility, but working with the DNR and our protocols, we prepared for how to identify in that event, right? So we have protocols. If we keep finding the same tag in the same place 4 or 5 times in a row, like, okay, is it super likely that fish is exactly where it's been for the last month and a half? Or do we think that potentially that's a tag that is in the same place because that fish has expired or died? But yeah, we did. So relatively shortly after the study began, during the week, like shortly after, either on or shortly after the southern or the general opener, right? So that would be like the first Saturday in May. We got a phone call that an angler had caught a fish that they believed to be a northern pike, which it actually was one of the tagged fish in our study. And the fish was harvested, and
I got a tag in my teeth. I got a tag in my teeth here.
It was in the deep fryer. Is that how they found the pit tag?
The tag, the fish was harvested and it was cooked on the beach, and then found the tag was found.
And we're not going to throw the gentleman under the bus. Not that we could if we wanted to anyway. But in his defense, he didn't hide from it. He said, "Hey, I found something."
No, yeah, and look, misconceptions happen, right? I think that's the takeaway from me isn't about placing blame or placing fault. Like I said, muskies die from lots of different things, and certainly angler harvest is one of them, and certainly mistaken angler harvest is one of them.
And I think as anglers, like when we all heard that story, we chuckled, but like that dry, sarcastic chuckle, because it's like, it's out there. We're in the state where the state fish is a muskie. We've talked about this: musky bars, musky trails, musky roads, muskies, and yet it's still not ever prevalent to know about how precious these are, how important a resource they are, to even know what they are. Like, is that a pike? I don't know. Is that a tiger muskie? I don't. You hear all that thing, and it was very real. Had a real piece of anecdotal data, but still data.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to all sorts of things, and certainly, like you could be an angler in the state of Wisconsin your whole life and never catch a muskie, right? So even though the fish is so deeply ingrained into the culture of our state, the history of our state, you're still talking about a low density fish, and and not everybody targets them as a species. And so I can absolutely envision a situation where someone fishes for lots and lots and lots of years and they never encounter one, but they end up encountering a lot of northern pike. And so mistakes happen, and I think it's important to talk about the fact too that there was definitely a silver lining to the situation. So the DNR was notified of the situation, like by all accounts and purposes, there was honesty informing every part of the communication, and the thing that was truly like tremendously valuable to us is that there's a price point on the tags, right? And so we wanted to maximize the number of tags that we could deploy into the field with the budget that we had. That meant that we bought 10 tags and we put 10 tags into the field. But because of that, all of the tags were in the field. And it prevented us from being able to do a bunch of the really important baseline testing that helped us isolate different variables, that helped us know if our protocol was correct, that helped us identify things like the range that we talked about earlier, things like that. So certainly a silver lining to the incident was that that tag was given back to the DNR, who gave it back to me, and then I was able to use that tag to isolate some variables that were really important moving forward that there was no way I was going to be able to do without it because we didn't have a tag for that baseline testing. So certainly a silver lining to the incident, certainly a scenario that we knew going in could absolutely happen, and that mortality of all causes is something that impacts muskies all the time. And an occasion where a little better understanding between the differences, the visual differences between a pike and a muskie could have meant that we had 10 fish in that night.
Yeah. And still probably surprised you when you got that phone call. Like you considered all of it could be caught by a musky angler and improperly handled. It could, predation, warm, all the things we could probably think of. And it wasn't like, oh yeah, someone thought it was a pike and they killed it.
Yeah.
It's like, darn
surprising.
it. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that they didn't just stomp it into the sand.
Right.
Right. That they as part of the study, we put signage all over our study area to make sure that we were informing the community about the study, what they should do if they angled a fish who had a tag sticking out of its belly, and what we would love for them to do, which was to let us know, right? Because angler catch information is data, right?
You got little field scientists out there, working for you on your behalf if you can leverage it for sure.
Yeah, and so that's also a reflection of that system of signage and information working, right? Yeah. Because the information that was on those signs is what was utilized to let both the DNR and us know, and yeah.
So I know it's like you said, it's still early. You're still kind of putting the data together. There's no conclusive. They're not usually probably never is a conclusive kind of thesis at the end, but what are some of the things, especially on a fish that moves, have you learned? Like, did they all kind of stay in the same spot?
Yeah.
Did they spread out? Where did it start to shake out as you started getting going?
Yeah, I think I'll preface it by saying that like the things that I learned and that I think our students learned may not be surprising to people who are like classically trained fisheries biologists, right? And I am not. I am a teacher. My profession and my career and my passion is teaching. I just happen to be really passionate about muskies as well. And so the things that I found fascinating and interesting might feel really mundane or obvious to people who have a different background or training than me. I think both the students and myself were probably guilty at the start of the study of thinking that while muskies would condense for a spawning event in the spring, that essentially they would have broken along lines of being fish that liked the riverine environment, fish that liked the lake environment, and that they utilized that common area for spawning, but after that spawning event essentially would like revert or divert back to their baseline, that there would be a pile of fish in our study that were river fish, and after spawning would just distribute along the river column in the river portion of our study, and there would be fish that would after spawning just return to the lake because they were lake fish and they liked it better there. And in our particular study, we just didn't see data that confirmed that. We saw fish moving around. They moved in and out of that lake and river environment more than I would have anticipated. And whether that's because they were responding to different seasonal variables like water level or heat or amount of oxygen in the system, things like that, I can't speculate on, but I can sure say that we didn't see like what I predicted we'd see in terms of fidelity to the river environment or fidelity to the lake environment. I think the other thing that I thought that I learned that was interesting was the importance of that confluence area that I talked about, that sort of braided network of backwatery channels, many of which are not even accessible by like you can't get to them because when the water comes up, that water fills in those backwater channels. It comes down, they get choked off, but there's still this like diverse network back in there, and that was used more, I think, than I predicted by the fish. Not that they would just move through it, but they would move into it and they would hunker. Even saying that is a little bit risky in the sense that that was the portion of the study area that we had the least success finding fish for the exact same reasons, right? It's really, really hard to get back in there. Not only is it like a complex braid of land and water, but there's also weird currents going on too, right? So trying to get in from below can be tricky. Trying to get in from above can be tricky. And the inlets and outlets of those little braided pockets aren't like linear and contiguous, right? It's like you're going from one little pocket and then a little channel and then, right? So we did find fish in there throughout the study, but we found them when we could get in there, or we found them when the plane was able to fly over. It was absolutely the hardest portion of the study area to find fish in because we just couldn't look for them very effectively.
Was there any point at which, like, and I don't want to like lead you to falsely make a conclusive statement that you don't like believe in, but was there any point in where it's like, oh wow, they're all in the lake, or oh wow, none of them are in the lake? Like, or was it a lot more independent kind of randomness that you're seeing? Again, only 10 fish, but still,
right.
Was there any like?
There definitely were times where we found them in one portion of the study area than others. Again, I can't say that means that. Remember that our average detection rate was still only about 40%, right? So even being able to say our 10 muskies are hanging out in this area is tricky because maybe only 40%. Like if we found 4 fish, then 60% of the fish were someplace else, right? And the other thing that is just inherently kind of tricky about it is that we weren't able to cover the entire study area in a single tracking event, or B, because so our protocol was that we were out tracking once a week. And so we weren't able to string together several sections of the study area several days in a row. And so that we couldn't be in 2 places at one time, and we couldn't be in all of the places as a result of stringing them together. Right. So that like ability to say, we found a few fish in one area, and then we found other fish real close by the next day, right? So that like absence of the rest of the data makes it sometimes hard to paint those clear pictures. But yeah, I think
it's similar again to the fishing side, where like you go out for them and you don't see a single thing, not a follow. Mm-hmm. It's like you have information, but as to what does it tell you? It's hard to know.
We did definitely see that early on in the study. So March, end of March, early April. So after that relaxation period or that recuperation period, we did see more fish in the transitional habitat between the lake and the river. right? Whether that's because they were still just in the process of distributing into the lake or distributing along the river column, or they were actively selecting that type of habitat that type of year or that time of year, I'm not sure. But yeah, definitely as the spring started, we found most of our fish in that that transitional habitat around the confluence of the river and the lake. As the summer progressed, we saw more even distribution of the fish that we found in the river, more even distribution along the river corridor. Like, they weren't all just hanging out in one place; they were spreading out.
Right.
And surprising, the upriver boundaries of our study area. We knew there was the potential to find them up there in the very highest upriver sections of them. But I don't think I thought it was super probable for a bunch of reasons.
How far are we talking? Like just roughly?
Yeah, so from the confluence, we're probably talking 8 to 10 miles, and through some there's some stuff that gets skinny. There's some stuff that gets rocky. There's some stuff that's weird and deep. But yeah, we did like midsummer find fish that were at the very upper portions of our study area. That was something surprising. Yeah, I think that kind of covers the biggest takeaways for me. And maybe I'll just also add that I probably had the idea that come October, every one of those fish was going to be hanging out in the deepest parts of the lake. And that wasn't really something that we found. We also found a lot of our lake fish were not hanging out in the deepest parts. And so when we were collecting data, we would, and still do, right, because it's active study, we're taking a bunch of other data too, right, like river clarity, turbidity,
Sure.
Water temperature, habitat type, stuff like that. Again, a little bit cautious to make any like declaratives, but initial cooking or initial analysis of the fish that we found in the lake does seem like that, like surface to 3 meters was where we found a lot of them. Not all of them, but that that 9 surface of water to like 9 to 12 feet deep area, we found a lot of them. And whether that's them orienting to, I think you can make all sorts of hypotheses about why, right?
Fishery, there's not a lot of like Cisco's in there. So
But even in I think I probably was guilty of having the hypothesis or like internalized, not spoken out loud prediction that in the fall we'd start finding them in the really, really deep stuff. And we didn't. And it could just be that it's tricky to find fish in 20 plus feet of water with the technology that we were using, but we really didn't find them in the deepest portions of our study area, with any consistency at all in the study thus far.
Interesting. What was the makeup of the fish like size, the 10 or eventually 9?
Yeah. So, smallest fish in the study was 30 inches. Biggest fish in the study was 49.75 inches, and we had really pretty good representation across that spectrum of size range. Couple fish in the 40s, couple fish in the mid 30s.
Did you know if you had males versus females? I mean, probably you can assume on some of the smaller ones, but
yeah. So this is an interesting thing that we didn't talk about. Joseph Gerbishak, the fisheries biologist in our area, and I talked ahead of the study, and made the decision together that while every fish in our study would have a full battery of biological data taken at the time that it was tagged, so age, weight, sex, length, right, all of that full battery of biological data was taken at the time that the fish were tagged. But we didn't receive that information until well into the study, and that was something that we decided to
You
do
didn't
right
know,
off the
like,
bat.
Tag 7 was the big girl. And,
Yeah, so we didn't want to inadvertently bias our tracking efforts to one fish or another, right? And we didn't want our students to either knowingly or unknowingly.
You found this one all the
Yeah,
time. Well,
yeah.
you were looking for it
Yeah,
all the time.
boy, that one that's almost 50 inches got found a lot.
I wouldn't want to find that one.
Yeah, so that information was essentially like embargoed from the students until like mid-January, and then we linked the tag numbers to the individual fish, got their biological data. The DNR technicians did a really cool job of pulling scales and using using fin rays to age the fish and actually be able to point out the different accumulation on those fin rays that helps you age the fish, which was pretty neat. In terms of like hard conclusions about, the differences between a 30-inch fish's behavior and a 50-inch fish's behavior, I think we'll just still have to wait and see, right? And especially since as of right now, we're looking at maybe like 2 to 6 detections per fish over the course of a year. So again, we're like there's
a lot of in-between time.
Mm-hmm. And I think that throughout, once it became clear what our detection rate was going to be, when we started like getting into the guts of the process, I started having a lot of like really productive conversations with Joseph about the fact that, like, number one, you obviously don't know what data is going to come from field work ahead of time, and then just making sure that we're working with the students like often to contextualize the fact that a successful study doesn't mean that you go out and find 10 fish every single time. And that concept that like no data is still data, and that all we're doing is doing the best we can possibly do to collect data in the right way. And then our job is to represent that data in the most authentic and like informed way. Right. And that hesitation that I think probably all people that do big studies like this, and it's certainly that I think is easy. It was easy for me to have to, it was important for me to have to like remember that regardless of how bad I wanted to have profound conclusions and revelations from the study, like the data is the data,
right,
and you can't push it one way or the other. And all you can do is learn as much as you possibly can.
And you
from
probably
what you did.
could.
Yeah.
That's the power of it. That's a little dangerous, and
Right.
it's like why you have to have the right people. And when DNR scientists do it, it's like you could make your own judgments, I'm sure, and be like, well, yeah, we learned this because of this, but it doesn't really.
Yeah.
Your bias is just all over that.
Yeah. And then if you have that detectable bias, then what's the point, right? Because then the data becomes meaningless because you've put your spin on it,
Right.
and you're trying to teach other people a way to do things,
Yeah, that makes sense.
When is the study complete, Jake? And will it be shared? Where can people get more information on it?
Yeah, the study, because we're working on a battery life of these tags, which isn't like fixed, right? So ultimately the study ends when we are no longer able to detect any signal from the fish. When we are consistently going out and not finding any fish, when we compare that to the predicted battery life of the tags, and those two things start to correspond pretty well. Like we're in that window and we're not finding fish, then I think the logical conclusion is those batteries have died. They're no longer, the tags are no longer emitting a signal. Study's over. So those tags have a battery life of like between 189 and 441 days. 441 days, I think what we have certainly found is that that's pretty optimistic based on the different variables like, cold water and other things like that they're throwing a signal. And it looks at least like some, if not all of the tags in our study aren't going to be 441 days exactly. But it's also not just that the tags throw a perfect, super strong, super clear signal until they don't, right? So it's not binary in terms of they're throwing this super crisp, clear signal or they're dead. It's that the signal strength wanes as the battery life decreases as well. So, yeah, ultimately, Josh, the end of the study will just be now that we are here at this point where we've exceeded the minimum tag life window. As soon as we run into a situation where we're just consistently not finding any fish, that's going to inform us to stop it. And the other thing that'll inform it is, like I said, we've got that test tag, right? And that test tag is throwing signal as well. So, that the benefit is that when we're just at school, we can turn the receiver on each morning, see if that thing's throwing signal. Right. And it can help inform us in terms of does it make sense to continue going out there looking for fish, or do we have reason to believe that those tags are dead?
Yep.
But you're also still in a probably important point of the study, which is it's the time of year you started, so you get to come back and see.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What a year looked like.
Yeah, and I think we spent a lot of time making sure that our protocols were dialed in right away when the project started, but we had just started, right? And so I think that we were really hopeful starting the study that by doing it for a full year, it meant that if there was anything that we needed to tweak in the beginning of our study in that spring portion, we were going to have a second kick at the can. Whether that's going to be the case or not, based on these battery lives or the battery lives in these tags, we'll see. But we've certainly still got it. We're still going out, right? So we haven't reached a point right now where we're just not getting any signal strength. We had very, very little success tracking them during the hard water period. So we're not going to, and that's something that Jordan mentioned too, that he found it in his study, virtually impossible to find tagged muskies through the ice, for a couple of different reasons. But we still went out and we tried it. So we had a community member who stepped up, and donated the use of a big side-by-side that was a tracked vehicle that allowed us to grid search the lake through the ice. And we weren't able to detect any fish through the ice. So pretty quick here in the next week or so, we'll get back out onto the water when the river levels come back down, and optimistic, hopeful that we start finding tags, and then we'll just keep tracking until we can't find tags anymore. The plane will be in the air within the next couple of weeks as well.
And then you would seemingly go into an analysis phase of pre-publishing, or kind of to Josh's other question, does this get shared? Does this go submit to the DNR? How does that work just from a process?
Yeah, so we'll analyze the data. We'll really rely on the support of the experts in the sciences that have already supported us so well to make sure that the conclusions that we're making are sound. And then, the students will work with me and with Joseph to make sure that we're writing a formal scientific research study on the project. And they'll also create a pretty robust presentation on the entirety of the study and report back to the stakeholders that supported us. So certainly report back to Muskies Inc., reporting back to First Wisconsin and the Sportsman's Club, and then ultimate sustainability, longevity of the whole project being to provide that information to the DNR as well.
That's awesome. It's also just crazy to think that these kids are what's the oldest? What's the age? 7th, 8th, 9th graders?
Yeah, there's been a little rotation, right? Because we started the study last year, and we had seniors on the team who have graduated out, and that means that we've brought in some kids who weren't in it last year. But
they get to put their name on it too.
They get to put their name on it, absolutely.
High schoolers.
The youngest kid in our project is about to turn 16.
Wow.
And the oldest ones were our seniors who graduated last year.
Where's their sentiment? Of starting out, you kind of said they're excited, they're pumped. How has the process been? Still optimistic, still enjoying it, or oh man, this is hard.
Yeah, you're talking about the total of 12 different kids, so I think they're all over the board. We've certainly still got kids that would go out tracking these fish every single day if you let them. And some of those kids might not be the kids who are really all that excited to sit down and start looking at statistical analysis. And we've got kids who are kind of maybe a little exasperated with the tracking stuff, but are antsy to start looking at the data. The general vibe though is still excited about the project, and what's neat about this project is that it has so many different sort of phases, right? That there's always something kind of fresh, and right around the time that what I've seen is that right around the time that one part of the project starts to lose that freshness, starts to feel mundane and sort of burdensome, it's over, and then it's time to switch gears into a different sort of pathway, different skill set, and sort of shakes the dust off and makes it new again.
That's cool. That's cool. So I guess like just a little bit of a different angle on this. What, as like an angler, have you will you change anything about how you fish because of something you've learned, or is it it hasn't really matched up to that yet?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that there's anything super profoundly different about the way that I will fish. One of the biggest things I've reflected on is that I think it has just really reinforced how impressive and cool I think that muskies are. The more that you learn about them, and there is there really are some great research studies being done on these fish right now as we speak, and by brilliant people who are doing innovative, cool stuff. And I think getting to stick my toes into the water of their world, and them being so overwhelmingly gracious and helpful and supportive all the way, during the entirety of it, has just really reminded me what a special, cool, mysterious species these muskies are. And then it truly has been a reminder that they're how fragile they are, the species is too. They face serious challenges to thriving in an environment for all the reasons that we kind of already know, that they're apex low density predators, that they need certain things in order to thrive and to successfully reproduce, and that we have such a abundant resource here that I think it can sometimes be easy to take that for granted, and getting to have this up close and personal relationship with the fish in a completely different way than when you're angling for them, right? That short interaction with one fish, the ability to spend an entire year creating this kind of abstract relationship with 10 different fish.
Have you named them at all yet?
Didn't name them.
Liar.
But we do have, we've got some really cool pictures of the tagging process, and so in some of the ways it overlaps a lot with that sort of personal connection that you make when you put one in the net on the end of a fly line. And then in other unexpected ways, there's this different type of relationship that really just reinforced how amazing, awesome, and cool I think the species are, and how important it is that we do the right things to protect them and where they live as well. And like I said, just being inspired by the work that's being done by other people that are a lot smarter than me.
And maybe similar to I feel this with angling for them, and you might feel the same way. I like the little Dunning-Kruger of the more you know, the less you know.
Yeah.
Wow, we're trying to know so much, and we just still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think muskies are really good at slowly revealing how little we know about them. Mm-hmm. Me, at least.
Yeah.
There's certainly people that know a lot more about them than I do.
Yeah. And I think that's a good moment, too. We've said it a few times, but just a huge shout out on behalf of Musky Fool, for sure, to the kids doing all the work, and finding that passion for it, getting out there, working, finding muskies, trying to find muskies. Gerbicek and Jordan for, blessing this and helping, give it direction. And, of course, you and the school for bringing it to life. Because it's sweet. I mean, I think selfishly, we're kind of wearing the angler hat. We work at Musky Fool. We want to know a lot about where the big ones live. And we don't really, it's not that simple, but we, on behalf of this awesome project, we'll all hopefully learn a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the goal. And I appreciate it. And I would just extend the same like endless outpouring of gratitude to the people that stepped up. Without that support, without that assistance and encouragement, and in ways that I, beyond what I would have ever even expected, the thing would not be real. It would be an idea about something that was kind of cool, but never happened. And because a lot of people cared and a lot of people turned that care into action, a whole bunch of kids get to do something that's really valuable, and we get to learn more about a thing that we love.
Yep. And like a little bit of a plug too for Muskies Inc., because I think for the general person, that's how they can get involved in something like this.
Absolutely.
We can't all go back to school. There's a limited amount of DNR resources. There's thankfully very limited amount of red bears in the world to bring stuff like. But there is
also low density.
Yeah, low density. Apex predator though. But like we can all join Muskies Inc. and help facilitate that in that way. Give it a blessing, give it funding, encouragement, and all that sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and like the 3 tenets of Muskies Inc., right? Fisheries, youth, and science and research.
Like on all of them.
Yeah, if you care about fisheries, if you think it's cool to provide unique, valuable experiences to youth, and you want to push, you think it's important that we're learning as much as we can about these fish that we love, then there's no reason not to support your Muskies Inc. chapter in any way that you possibly can.
I'm going to also plug you right now. I know they're looking for awesome articles for the Muskies Inc. magazine at some point. You should submit it. Otherwise, I'll just submit it and write your name at the bottom, because I know a lot of, that whole, what you just said, like, that's what makes it unique. There have been other studies like it, but I don't think there have been any other studies like it with 8th graders and 9th graders at the helm.
Right. Yeah. That youth
it is
piece.
literally the youth, really intersecting on that youth aspect of not just getting a fishing rod in their hands, but, teaching them a invaluable skill for their future.
Yeah, 100%.
What do we miss, dude? What else do you want to like share about this? Any people to give a shout out to? We've kind of touched on most of them. We've hit all our questions. I think there's still some questions to come as you guys wrap this up. We'd love to have you kind of give us a final where it's going. I guess that's maybe my last question is, what is the future of this after you finish? Is there, we'll kind of get put on the bookshelf and pick up a different project, or does it open more doors to other questions that could potentially be
I'm
worked
really
on?
grateful for the relationships that were like formed and like galvanized during the study. And Wildlands will never stop being a school that wants to create opportunities to go learn things in the woods and on the waters in our area. And so, I think utilizing the relationships that were formed through this study to stay on the front foot is going to be something that we're really excited about doing. And also like the collaboration and the like two-way street nature of the relationships is like going to almost certainly look like talking to the DNR and trying to inquire about where our abilities and flexibilities and our strengths as a program align with things that they want to get done,
them.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
But certainly, we'll trying to stay on that front foot.
Love it. Well, thank you, man. This was awesome. I know, folks, if you have questions, feel free to submit them to us. We'll try and maybe have Jake back on and answer them, or figure out a way to get them answered. But this is just, we were excited. Something really cool happening in Musky Country with a lot of different cool angles with the kids, with how it came to be, and a lot of good people involved doing cool stuff. So just a huge thank you to Red Bear for coming on and talking to us. We're glad too, because we made it through 4 episodes and Bam Bam and I ran out of things to talk about. We got the feedback that everybody was like, we're done hearing you two. Bring on someone else.
Yep.
I don't buy that for a second. Not for a second, but thank you. And I'm thrilled to come and chat with you guys and be the message bearer on a thing that's going on. Yeah.
Awesome.
Heck yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap that up. Another episode in the books. Big thank you to everybody for listening, tuning in. If this is your first one, please go check out the others. Like, subscribe, share. Go sign up for Muskies Inc. And we'll hopefully keep the good stuff rolling. We're going to be locking Red Bear down in the dungeon here because we're going to record another one that is somewhat related. It'll come out after this about live scope for muskies. If you can't find him with radio telemetry, maybe you can find him with live scope. We'll find out on the next episode. But that's it, guys. Have fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Spot Burn Podcast. Coming to you from the dungeon, this podcast is presented by Musky Fool Fly Fishing Co. We want to thank our awesome sponsors, Cortland Line Company and Stealth Craft Boats. We also want to thank all of you, our listeners, for tuning in, subscribing, sharing, and spreading the good word. If you haven't heard, go check us out at muskyfool.com. Have fun out there on the water, y'all.